Okay, welcome again. This webinar is brought to you by the Business Succession Planning Program, which is part of the OEOC, or Ohio Employee Ownership Center at Kent State University in Kent, Ohio. We're a nonprofit training and outreach organization located on the Kent State campus. We focus on job retention and business growth by helping small business owners learn more about the importance of succession planning. Today our topic is maximizing the ESOP benefit, employee ownership culture. My name is Jay Simachek, and with that, let's start. Some assumptions I'd like to make for today are that we are really addressing the small business owner. Now, I know that many of our attendees may not be small business owners. I know we have some economic development professionals. We probably have some service providers, what I would call service providers, attorneys, financial planners, etc., who work on a regular basis with small businesses. But I've prepared the presentation from the perspective of dealing directly to the small business owner. And unless I miss my guess, I would imagine that a number of you have either been a small business owner yourself or certainly worked for a small business and, as I said, are working with small business owners. We're assuming that the value of early succession planning is something you recognize. And you know that there are many advantages to start that exit planning process as soon as you possibly can. You've started exploring some of the options. You know that there are many options available. Sometimes these options can be very confusing, and the process that you are about to undertake can be very complex. We're assuming that you're aware of employee ownership. You know that that is possibly an option. You possibly don't know the mechanics of it. You don't know the process by which you can become an ESOP company or an employee-owned co-op, but you're aware that it's out there. And today we're here to learn about the culture, the cultural implications of employee ownership. And this is in contrast to the actual deal mechanics, or how I would create an ESOP, the legal and financial implications of actually creating an ESOP. So today we're going to learn about the culture. The purpose, as I said, from the perspective of the selling owner, is to connect the business succession planning process with the whole issue of culture. We're going to talk about what culture means and how culture relates to the special circumstances in an employee ownership situation. We're going to touch on succession planning and its choices, but we're not going to focus on succession planning. We're going to talk about culture, what it is, and why it's important in the planning process and why it's important and connected to employee ownership. We're going to talk about what makes an ownership culture special and unique, why leaders who are in a position to share ownership with their employees may or may not make that decision. We're going to talk about some perceptions of employee ownership by the various stakeholders. What are the roles in an employee-owned company and how is it governed? We're going to talk about the relationship of values in a company and behaviors among the employees in a company to the whole issue of employee ownership and culture. We're going to talk a little bit about how to get there. If a company is not there yet, what is the path it may take to achieve an ownership culture? So, bottom line is, if you're considering ownership transition to your employees, what are the cultural issues? First, a little bit about my background, and very little, but just so that you know that I've kind of been there, done that. Back in the 80s, and maybe I'm dating myself by saying this, but back in the 80s, I helped orchestrate a succession plan for a small business owner. took a job with the company, and the owner made it clear that he wanted to exit the business, and we did so within a couple years. I stumbled on an option called ESOPs, and we researched it, and we transitioned that family-owned business to a 100% employee-owned company. Then I stayed on and managed the company over the next 15 years and led a culture shift. And little did I know on day one, when the retiring owner left, what a challenge it would be. Because we really needed to make that shift in culture. And it was pretty much a 180-degree shift from what it was before the employees actually became owners. So let's talk about succession planning for a bit here. You as a small business owner have some basic choices. First of all, you can sell outside. You can sell to another company. You can sell to an owner that wants to take control of your company and make money from it. You can sell inside. You can sell to perhaps family members who are engaged in the business currently. You can sell to management, maybe a management group through an LBO. Or you can sell to all of your employees. It's a confusing process, and you absolutely, positively need help to do it. And as we said before, you've probably known by now that it's in your best interest to start as early as you possibly can. An outside sale may go to an investor. An investor is primarily interested in return on investment. That outside investor may or may not choose to get involved in the company, but they're interested in making money from your business. A strategic buyer, also obviously interested in making money, may have a synergy with your business. It may be a customer, it may be a vendor, it may be a competitor that knows that a merger or acquisition of your company will fit nicely with his or her business. In any case, any ownership transition is really a tough cultural challenge. And in both of these cases, those buyers are looking at your culture. You should know that when they're valuing your business and making you an offer, they're looking at the kind of culture that they sense is in your business. Is it an asset? Is it the kind of culture that they would want should they own the business and carry forward? If it's a merger acquisition situation, will it fit the culture of the company that's doing the acquiring? Okay. I would say probably the most common reason for acquisition failure or trouble is somewhere in the culture area. The way the new employees behave with the employees of the acquiring company. On an inside sale, obvious is family. Okay, it may be the intent of the small business owner to pass the business on to his or her family. That may have been the intent all along. Another option would be, as I said before, management. There may be a management group that's interested in raising the capital necessary to buy the business. And in that case, that could be a good option. Or employee ownership. And two common vehicles for employee ownership would be an ESOP or a co-op. Both of these options are things that we here at the center, at the OEOC, deal with and conduct training on. But there are obviously some differences. We're not going to go into the technical differences today, but there are some commonalities and some differences. there can be some significant seller tax advantages, okay, in either an ESOP or a co-op situation. Both of them would qualify for what's known as the 1042 rollover, which is a law that allows the selling owner to defer capital gains tax on the sale of his company to an ESOP or co-op. That could be significant in some cases. There could be some company tax advantages for the operating company going forward, especially in an ESOP situation, which could make it an advantage for that operating company once it becomes an ESOP. It could be an advantage, could be the desire of the selling owner to sell in stages, and an ESOP would be a perfect vehicle to do that. We often see ESOPs being formed through a gradual equity sale of the selling owner over time, perhaps over a 5-year period. And at each stage, if the owner qualifies, that tax advantage, that 1042 tax advantage could kick in at each one of those stages. And an ESOP is an ERISA plan. Here's a difference. Co-op isn't necessarily an ERISA plan, but an ESOP is a recognized retirement plan. And as such, an ESOP is required to follow all the rules and regulations and laws governing retirement plans. And there may be unique cultural issues in all three cases. I think you can see, whether it's family, management, employee ownership, all the employees getting involved, each one would present itself with unique cultural challenges. All right, let's talk about that magic word, culture. What is it? What is it? Well, I like to think of it, and it's kind of a shame that we're giving this in a webinar format, because I would like to be standing in front of you and kind of get your feedback on what you think culture is, okay? I like to think of it in terms of values, behaviors, and processes. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but basically I think culture is derived from the values that the leadership of the company sets forth and identifies as the guiding values of the company. Those values lead to a set of behaviors that the kind of the expectations that the leadership sets for the behavior of the people within the organization. And the processes are key, because the processes support and generate those behaviors. And it's kind of a cycle that we'll talk about a little bit later. In any case, I think you would all agree that you kind of know it when you see it. If you walk into a company, it doesn't take long, if you meet the employees, it doesn't take long before you can kind of sense the culture that's inside that company. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Kind of a personal experience here. People used to say, as soon as they walked into our company, this was after it was employee-owned for 4 or 5 years, and we started to make some progress on our culture. People used to say that as soon as they walked into our company and encountered Andrea, who was our receptionist, they knew there was a special culture. I always took that as a compliment, because that says that the behaviors and the relationships that they encountered when they met people for the first time in our company just came through. Let me take a moment. I'm looking at a couple chats that have come in. Dan, yes, we are recording this. And Dan, you agree with the definition of culture. Thank you. Why is it important to a business? Well, the big reason is the bottom line. And this is something that I'm going to emphasize throughout the rest of the time that we're talking, because it is the big issue in moving more companies to employee ownership. To me, it's fairly obvious that the right culture, whatever that is, the right culture can definitely enhance the bottom line and improve performance. Unfortunately, I don't think all small business owners perhaps realize that that's true. What we'll talk about in a few minutes is the fact that merely sharing equity with your employees doesn't guarantee a better bottom line. And in fact, sometimes it's been shown that forming an ESOP or creating employee ownership and allowing the culture to go in the wrong direction actually deteriorates the bottom line. But what we also have seen is that sharing equity with your employees and creating the right culture is a definite plus to the bottom line. So that's why culture is important to a business. And the second reason is what I would call enjoy your job. I think work needs to be meaningful. I think that really these two items relate to, I would say, the two reasons that we work. One is to get rewards, and if you don't have a good bottom line, you're not going to be able to afford the reward. And two, it's for the positive energy that we get when we walk into the place we work. All right? If we can have that positive energy, if we enjoy walking through the door every morning, and we get rewarded accurately, we're going to want to work, and we'll be more effective at it. Okay, so let's assume that you're a small business owner and you're considering passing ownership to your employees. Great. Well, what motivates you? What is motivating you as a small business owner to do this? The first one I've got up there is the dollars that you'll get when you exit the business. And fortunately or unfortunately, that's often the case. That is the big motivator. You know that you've got an incredible amount of your wealth tied up in the equity of your business, and when you exit, you're going to be able to get that equity out. And that payoff is motivating you. Second, it could be the right thing to do. You may just feel, well, hey, the notion of me sharing my company's stock with the employees that have supported me over the years is just the right thing to do. They deserve it, okay? And that's great. Or you may be thinking of the legacy of your business. Maybe your personal legacy. Maybe your name is over the entrance to your company, and you would like that to stay there for years to come. There's an interesting concept in the ESOP world known as sustainability, and that's the ability of a company to endure and stay a viable entity. And I think many small business owners would like to think that their business will carry on beyond them. And then there's company performance. Okay, that's what we're talking about just earlier. Do you think that by sharing ownership with your employees that your company is going to perform better? Well, if you really do, perhaps you should have done it before you were ready to exit the business. So, also I might say that some businesses, perhaps the larger companies, are motivated by what I would call financial implications of plugging in an employee benefit. As we know, an ESOP plan is a retirement plan. And we know that there are some tax advantages to doing so. Again, if this is the motivation of a company, it has little to do with culture, but it's motivating them to put in an employee ownership plan just because it has financial implications. And frankly, based on research, probably the majority of existing ESOPs were formed for that reason. Currently, there are in excess of 9,000, probably 9,000 to 10,000 ESOPs in the country, and the majority probably were formed because of that reason. Well, did you know that sharing stock with employees does not necessarily yield a better bottom line? You probably did. However, combining the sharing of stock with the right culture does. And I mentioned this before. It's an important point. It really is. Addressing that, let's ask this question. Why did you, again addressing the small business owner, why did you become an owner? Think back to when you started your business. It probably had something to do with the fact that you believed at that time it would give you a better chance for success. You were faced with other options, working for someone else. Maybe you're the type that just doesn't like to work for someone else. But at any rate, you probably thought your best chance for future success was to start your own business or to become an owner or to buy a business. Well, let me ask you this. Now that you're an owner, do you think and act like an owner? I would hope you do. I would hope you think and act like an owner. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but basically we're talking about a huge sense of responsibility and a huge motivation, a huge dedication to the success of the company, those kinds of things. And do you think that that thinking and acting helps the company performance? Well, I would certainly hope so. I would certainly hope that you think that what you do during the day helps the company perform better because you're thinking and acting like an owner. Would you agree then that it helps create wealth for you? Again, following my logic here, I would think that the answer to that should be yes. Well then, the payoff is, isn't it logical that your employees might be motivated by the same thing? But in reality, most companies really don't focus on creating a winning culture. This is my estimation. I think, in my mind, and hopefully in yours, you consider culture an important element to company success. But really, do most companies put effort into creating the culture that's going to set them apart from their competition? I don't think so. And I would add that a majority of ESOPs are no different. Again, in the whole world of ESOPs, the majority probably don't have the kind of culture that we're talking about. But those that do stand out. They really do. We at the center spend a lot of our time training current ESOP companies in this whole culture thing. We use the term ownership mentality. And we'll encounter in almost every one of our sessions ESOP companies that have been around for a number of years. And they are asking, how can we obtain this ownership mentality? How can we turn our employees around? How can we get them to work harder? How can we get them to cooperate more? How can we get more teamwork? So it's something that is really an ongoing process and not necessarily an easy one. So why don't more leaders move to employee ownership? Well, one reason, I believe, is loss of control. I think one attribute of a small business owner, an entrepreneur, if you will, is this issue of control. They like to be in control. And I believe, I've had some small business owners tell me this, that they fear that if they turn the stock over to their employees, that it's going to affect the governance of the company. Who's in control? Who makes decisions? Well, that does not necessarily have to be true, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Second, I think a lot of them actually doubt this issue of improved performance that we've been talking about. And is that a lack of respect for the employee? I don't know. Do they have less confidence in the employee to really perform above and beyond their expectations and to do things they didn't think they could do? I don't know. But I think often the issue of improved performance is not something that an owner may believe will happen if they share equity with their employees. And third, a reluctance to share. Another word that I could have used here is greed, but I decided to phrase it this way because this may be a conscious decision that an owner has, that they just are not inclined to share, the ownership in their business. And that's fine, that's okay. But that may be their position. And really, maybe the word share is not the correct word either, because in an ESOP, it's earning. The employees are actually earning the equity in the business, and it's not necessarily being given to them. And the small business owner needs to understand more of the mechanics of the ESOP, which we're not getting into today, to understand that. What does employee ownership mean? Let's look at some of the responses from, did I go back here? Yeah. First from some management, or CEOs and ESOPs. Responses to that question by leaders of ESOP companies who are well on their way to the culture, achieving a good culture, may say, we work for ourselves to benefit all current and future employees of this company. So they're looking to the future, they're looking to sustainability, and they know that there's a teamwork kind of aspect to this. They may say that I have to be transparent about why I make decisions, why I make the decisions I do. Transparency is a big part of employee ownership culture, and that leads us to some of the things we'll talk about in terms of communication and open book management and being frank and open honest with the employees. They may say everyone pitches in so we can succeed. And again, that points to the teamwork and problem-solving issues that are so necessary. ESOP researchers have looked at employee ownership, and believe me, the history is there with employee ownership movements starting back in the 70s. We have a number of companies that we can do some research on. They have found that average wages are higher in ESOPs. They have found that average retirement accounts are greater in ESOPs when compared to comparable companies. And average yearly post-ESOP improvement in return on assets is between 2 and 3%. So we know through some pretty reliable research that the performance aspect is there. And when we talk to employee owners about this 2.7%, we sometimes show this chart just to impress upon them the fact that 2.7%, even though it may not seem like much, over time can be incredibly powerful because of compounding. So this little chart simply shows two examples of employees who started out with, at age 23, with $1,000 in their account. One was returning 10%, the other was returning 7.3%, a difference of 2.7, and you can see the difference in accumulation of that $1,000 at age 65. So this kind of points out the fact that even a small improvement in performance means a big difference to the employee over time. Some more statistics. This study happened to be with 1,400 employees in ESOP companies based on attitudes toward their employee ownership. You can see a percentage that says that employee ownership is bad. This may be a little higher than what I would refer to as kind of the 5% factor. Even in a company that's got a great culture, you're probably going to get 5% of your employees for which you can do nothing good. And they probably won't be happy with employee ownership. Perhaps it's because they don't understand it. And you get a fairly large percent that say it could be good, but here it's not so good. And then you get an even larger percentage that says employee ownership is okay, and they're on the verge of becoming champions. And then you have your champion group, which are the ones that really help communicate your employee ownership and the benefits to the rest of the group. So what do we see? Well, we see that you don't expect 100% buy-in ever. And you communicate to everyone, because over time, people can change. Those percentages, those groups change. You have people leaving the company, you have new people entering the company. So again, it's a continuous process and challenge. The people bottom line. We refer to ownership culture assets sometimes. And obviously teamwork is a huge part of that. The ability to work with one another, the ability to support one another, and the ability to work as a team and get something done. We also sometimes use this concept called social capital. The social part of it is the trust, relationships, and innovative behavior of the employees, and the capital part is the fact, points to the fact that it's a positive asset, and it can be translated into the bottom line. It can be translated actually into dollars and cents. Human capital is very similar. The human element, in an employee-owned company that has diversity and knowledge, and where the employees are eager to learn and accept new training and develop new skills and are highly motivated and committed, that's a human capital asset. And as I said, these all then translate to actual financial performance. Obviously, these assets can't be found on the balance sheet, but we know if a company has them, right? We know if a company is performing in this way, and if they do, they have a tremendous advantage over their competitors. Excuse me. Let's get back to the governance issue. Who's in charge in an ESOP? Why might there be some misconceptions about governance? Well, in an ESOP, we have a board of directors, and the board of directors is in charge of the governance with oversight of management, and they're accountable to the shareholders for the business performance. That's no different than a normal company. An ESOP company will have a CEO who is responsible for the profitable operations, and he or she is accountable to the board for the performance of the business. No different than a normal company. Then if you drill down through the organization, the team, the committee, and the individual accountabilities are all there. So basically, the message is the governance does not have to change just because the company is employee-owned. Okay? Now, it's possible, but not mandatory, to do what we call pass-through voting rights to the participants in an ESOP. And without getting into details about the mechanics of an ESOP, we know that an ESOP is a trust, and we know that the employees own rights to shares in that trust. Okay? And the ESOP plan, as it's can have provisions that pass through voting rights to the employees to vote on the board. Now, that does not happen in a majority of cases, but it could. Or there may be special provisions that allow or mandate X number of places on the board for rank and file workers. Okay, that could be done, but it doesn't have to be. It's not mandated. The nomination process for the board could be designed in such a way that would assure some representation by rank and file. Just similarly, as a company can specify it wants outside membership for its board, which is very commonly done, and they design the nomination process so that happens. However, in an ESOP, we normally see a much flatter organization if things are running right, because often there should be an effort to push decision-making down through the organization to what I call the lowest level of competence. And that can happen in an ESOP company because you have increased motivation and decision-making and problem-solving skills down through the organization, and probably more leadership skills that are exhibited down through the organization, so that so that we can actually push that decision-making down through the company. The role of employee owners traditionally is to the role of traditional employees, not necessarily an employee-owned situation, is to do my job, to do it safely, with quality, and to produce the number of widgets that I'm supposed to produce, to satisfy the customers, and to obey the company policies. That's kind of a traditional employee's role. In an employee-owner situation, they're focused on supporting the mission to the benefit of the entire company. That means they need to understand the mission, and they contribute to the financial success. They know they need to contribute to the financial success. That implies that they know how they affect the bottom line. And this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, and I think a key indicator in the culture development process. I used to say that when I'm convinced that an employee knows exactly how they affect a line on the financial statements in the job they do, you've really started to arrive in the culture process. An employee owner needs to keep informed about the strategic direction and the financial health of the business. That implies that they're given the financial results and they can understand them. And an employee owner actually participates well in open discussions of the issues. Also, the employee owner helps to achieve a strategic direction and helps find solutions for improvement. They're continually looking at ways to improve the company, and they're a support for a positive work environment. That is encouraged. They look at the legacy of the company, again, the sustainability. How can this company be sustained into the future so that not only me as an employee owner, but a future employee owner can take advantage of the benefits that I'm taking advantage of. So can you have a good culture in a non-employee-owned company? Of course. Can you have a bad culture in an employee-owned company? Of course you can. Yeah. Just having an employee ownership situation or an ESOP does not guarantee you of a good culture. Well then, if that's possible, what's the big deal? Okay, well, I want to return you to the performance issue. We need to understand that there's a huge motivator to move the culture in the right direction because it can affect the bottom line. And isn't it really easier to ask them to act like owners if they really are? My mentor in employee ownership, a manager that I worked for early on, used to tell me that all the time, that it's much easier to struggle with this culture transition if they really are owners. Makes sense. So, employee owners, what do they expect? What works best with employee owners? Well, I'll go back to addressing the small business owners in the audience, and those of you that have worked with small business owners. You're an owner. What do you expect? Before I go further with this slide, you probably noticed the acronym, okay? I was reviewing these slides this morning, and I noticed that, and I said, oh my goodness, I need to change that, but I didn't. For one thing, I thought you might get a laugh out of it, but it might fit the slide as well, okay? An owner expects to be communicated with, okay? An owner expects to be communicated with, honestly. An owner expects a huge amount of responsibility. He expects all of us to be responsible for our job, and he expects for himself to be responsible. An owner expects accountability, okay? Being held accountable for a job that needs to be done. And an owner expects to participate in everything that's happening, or in the key things that are happening. So those are four. I'm sure there are many more, but I think those are four key things that an owner expects. This is what I call the culture cycle. And it goes back to a point I made earlier, where I really believe that the culture starts with values. And in our situation, one of the first things we did after we became an ESOP was to spend time identifying those values. We did a strategic plan. We designed a strategic planning process. And as part of that, we really identified those values that were important going forward as a company. Those values, once you've identified them, lead to a set of behaviors. A set of behaviors that you would like to see exhibited by your employees. And what I recommend is to be specific and document them and communicate them as often as possible. And in that way, the expectations in the organization are set up around those behaviors. So as you've chosen those behaviors, there are processes that you need to design, things you need to do, in other words, okay? Systems and processes, things you need to do around the company that generate those behaviors, that support those behaviors, that send the signal to the organization that those behaviors are important. And as you implement those processes, you then reinforce the values. And then those values generate more behaviors. So it's kind of a cycle that is a good cycle to get into. When I say values, what am I talking about? Well, here are four that come high on a lot of companies' lists. Quality. You may be a company that really believes in the highest quality. Customer service is always a good value. Treating your customer in the right way, wowing the customer. Another value may be integrity. Honesty and devotion to the company, and just a high degree of integrity with everything that the employees do. Innovation may be another value. We have a local company that has really identified innovation as their driving value, and as a result, they have really become an intrapreneurial, if you will, company where the employees know that they're expected to innovate in their jobs and create new ideas. And as a result, they have created 5 different companies in 5 different product lines within their ESOP. So it can happen. When I say behaviors, what am I talking about? Well, you've got the 4 that I referred to earlier. But you've also got things like teamwork, working together well as a team, supporting your fellow worker. And support is really different than teamwork. Support is what I would refer to as helping your fellow workers succeed, okay? And this is something that we focused on in our company. We actually, in our performance review process, we identified this as a performance line item. And I had the managers judge this item, this issue, this behavior, for all of the workers that reported to them. Effort to learn. Many ESOP companies with the right culture become what's known as a learning environment. They generate a learning environment where all the employees know that learning is expected of them, and they make educational opportunities very available to the employees. Honesty is a behavior. Frankness, honesty, assertiveness, the ability to step forward and act on your own. A positive attitude is something that we would always like to see in a company, but that's sometimes something that needs to be talked about, or it doesn't happen. And fairness and trust. And that last issue of trust is huge, because all through this process, the leadership of the company is attempting to generate trust down through that organization. And being fair is a big part of that. Just a real quick example on the fairness thing. Within the first 2 days after we became an ESOP in our company, we did two things. One was to eliminate all the reserved parking spaces in the parking lot. We did reserve some for customers, but we eliminated them for special employees. And we threw out the time clock in our shop. Okay, we got rid of the time clock. So there are things that we can do day in and day out that portray this fairness and trust. That takes us to the processes. We have the values, we have the behaviors. Well, how do we make it happen? Well, as I mentioned, one of the things you can do is a strategic planning process, and that's where maybe the values and the mission statement is generated. And that whole process can be done with the help of the employees. You can design a process that reaches down through the organization to do that. Various interactions to communicate. Okay, communication can be done in so many ways we can't list them all. It can be done one-on-one, and it should be done one-on-one often. It can be done within a team, within a project team. It can be done within a department, and it certainly can be done in the whole company if the company size allows that to happen. And I think the key here is to vary the levels of communication, do it in a variety of ways. Open book management is a process. Some of you may know what open book management is. Generally, it's teaching the employees the basics of reading a financial statement, an income statement, balance sheet, and then sharing that information on a regular basis with them in very simple terms, very fundamental basic terms, the financial condition of the business. Training, making training very, very available. Okay? You can provide a number of training processes that allow the employees to improve their skills. Social events that combine ownership. We see ESOP companies that are incredibly creative in terms of how they can get their employees together in various social events, but always combining an ownership theme or teaching something about employee ownership while they're at the social event. It could be lunches, it could be breakfast, it could be dinners. And then wellness is a good process. Okay? Many ESOP companies are showing their commitment to the employees by creating wellness programs so that the employees understand that their health is critical. The point I would like to make is that achieving the culture is really a leadership issue. It really is a leadership issue. And my philosophy is that we can generate leadership skills right down through the organization. In fact, that was my aim, was to generate as many leaders as I could in the company. Now, as you probably all know, leadership and management is not the same thing, and I think it's in your best interest to point that out within the company, that you've probably heard phrases, managers do things right, but leaders do the right thing. Managers acquire their power from position, leaders acquire their power from influence. We know there are differences, and if we're lucky enough, we'll get our top management possessing both excellent managerial skills and leadership skills. It's a different style. It's a different style of leadership. Basically, it's the difference between an autocratic style and a participative style. And in our case, it really was about 180 degrees, because the old company was run fairly autocratically. With employee ownership at our company through the ESOP, it needed to become participative to really take advantage of the culture. So that's where the transition takes place. Some think that it's tougher to manage or to lead in a employee ownership situation. It may be tougher for some people, but there's more communication and less oversight. So there could be some additional things that a leader needs to do in terms of communication and participation and decision making, but in the long run, if it's done correctly, there will be less oversight, less management, and we can end up with that flatter organization chart that we talked about. And finally, it takes a well-written plan. Okay? There are things that are done during the, again, back to the mechanics. As the plan is being written with the help of an attorney, with an ESOP attorney, an experienced ESOP attorney knows how to write the plan to help generate some of these cultural issues that we're talking about. For instance, we talked about the pass-through voting issue, okay, whether or not you pass through voting to the employees. Eligibility is another issue in the plan that will be defined. The government has given us certain minimums for a lot of these provisions in a plan, but a company often can be more generous than regulations dictate. Normal eligibility rules would be 1 year of service, 1,000 hours of work, and 21 years old. A company could make that more generous. A vesting schedule is another issue. Okay? Currently, there's a 3-year cliff, or 100% vesting after 3 years, or a graded vesting situation, which would start grading at 20% in the second year. Again, the company could design a plan where there's immediate vesting. Okay? Methods to allocate the stock in the trust account based on W-2 wages or a combination of wages and seniority. There are a myriad of those kinds of provisions in the plan that can be done to promote the culture. To wrap up here, let me just go through fairly quickly a summary of actually a course that we put on here at the center that talks about the building of the culture. And again, we can talk for quite a while on specifically how you go about building this culture. But in general, the philosophy, or my philosophy, is that we start at the bottom with apathy. Okay, an employee or a person that would maybe answer an ad for employment at your company is apathetic to employee ownership. They don't know anything about it. Okay. Or you could hire an employee that is apathetic after they join, which is not the ideal situation, but that could happen. Or you could have an employee that turns apathetic after some time in the company. In any case, you need to move that person to a caring situation where they care about the company, they care about employee ownership, and they take pride in the work and the company. right? I might add, these stages that I'm going through really can apply to an individual. They can apply to a team or a group of people or a department or an entire company. Once they care, that person needs to become proactive. In other words, you need to provide the tools and the skills so that they can make a difference in their job. Then they want to act, they want to move forward, they want to do something because they now care. Well, it's not just enough to do something, they need to move in the right direction. So this stage is what we call positive action. And the key here is to have goals and to communicate why that person is moving in any direction at all. And often we'll become more aware of indicators in the company, what's important, the performance indicators in the company, and at this point that employee would be well versed in how they affect the bottom line. And then finally, obviously, if you reach this point, now you're getting results. And when you get results, a key element at whatever level you are is to recognize the success, and that's where rewards come in. So we are at 1 hour, and we're just about wrapped up. I think in summary, what I'd like to say is that culture can make a difference. We really think that culture can make a difference. And ownership in a company really rewards, the ownership rewards that can come about through an ESOP can be an incredible motivator, okay? We know it, it's been proven, and it can motivate the employee. Once that happens, there's an element of personal wealth creation. We know that wealth can be created at a higher level in a well-run, employee-owned company. And when that happens, there's a definite economic effect for the city, not only for the company and the employee, but for the city, the state, and the nation, okay? It can be an economic generator. And the key here is educating the business owner, okay? Whether you're a business owner or you're an economic development professional or you're a service provider, an attorney, or a financial planner, making the business owner aware that employee ownership is a viable alternative and there can be definite advantages to not only him or her, but the company in the future is critical. And knowing that employee ownership is a viable alternative to improve performance, I think, is the bottom line. So, with that, let me take a quick look at any of the chats that may have come through. I have one comment from Dan. He says, hire people into roles for which they have a passion to do. I would totally agree. Michael, yes, I can share the PowerPoint. Just get in touch with me at the, you have my number up there, and I'll pass on the PowerPoint. What happens to an employee if a company has to lay off its employees? Also, an employee needs to be terminated. Well, this is an ESOP company is no different than other companies in terms of its set of standards for the jobs that are being performed. And if an employee does not perform to the level of expectance, then termination can occur. Just because they own stock in the company does not mean that they cannot be terminated. And when they do, then distribution rules would set into effect. And that's more the mechanics of the ESOP. I won't get into that, but there are various ways that an employee who has vested interest in his ESOP account can get paid for that. It may take some time, and he may have to wait until a retirement, or in other companies he may get lump sum immediately. A wide range of alternatives in how the distributions are made. Mel, what initially motivated you to begin the culture shift? Well, When I heard about employee ownership and presented that to the owner of the company, and we decided to pursue that for his exit plan, the more I researched employee ownership, the more I liked it as a management style. I thought it fit my style much more than the autocratic style. I thought I was more inclined to participate with the employees and communicate with the employees, and I really recognized the power that could be unleashed by the employees if we did it. So it wasn't easy, and it took some time, but and I had some false starts along the way, but I think we accomplished a great deal, and the rewards were there for those employees. Any other chat questions? I'm going to unmute everyone now. Perhaps someone has a comment they'd like to make.
The conference has been unmuted.
Okay, the line should be open if anyone has a question they'd like to throw out.
I'd be interested in hearing about some of your initial false starts and stumbles, and how you reacted to them.
Oh boy, how much time do you have?
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, Jay. It's just that, you know, one, getting in order to really understand the value is just the first small step. The second is you're not going to hit a home run at every at-bat. And so when something doesn't work, what motivated you to keep going, and what changes did you make?
It's a great question, and I think what I can say is
another webinar.
It's another webinar, right? Yeah, come back next week. No, real quickly though. I think what I learned was that there were so many of these processes that I was referring to earlier. There are many things to do, techniques, you know, kind of the idea of the week. And I started attending ESOP events and ESOP training, and I joined the ESOP Association. And I later became the president of the Ohio chapter and experienced a lot of other ESOP companies, and was very interested in what they were doing. And I started trying these, and they didn't always work. So what I realized, and that kind of led me to the 5-step approach, is that there are so many things to do to help you along the way. You first need to recognize where your organization is, or where your individual is. If you're dealing one-on-one with an individual and you're trying to get them over the hump and trying to convince them of the value, you need to understand where they are. You know, are they in a caring situation? Are they apathetic? Do they want to work but they don't have the tools? So I think that was one of the early lessons, was to figure out a way to methodically implement the process so that I would move either the individual or the department or the company along.
Thanks.
Okay, we're about at the end of the road here. I want to thank you all for attending. Please don't hesitate to contact me at the OEOC for any further discussion or information on the subject. We're going to archive this session for future viewing, so please see our website for access to other webinars and podcasts. We have some future events coming up in terms of our webinars. On February 23rd, a session called Issues as an Employee-Owned Company Co-op Matures. This will be focused on co-ops. On February 25th, another co-op session, Selling Your Business to an Employee-Owned Co-op, Doing the Deal. This one is with Mark Stewart at Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick. Very interesting session, I'm sure. Also, I want to remind you, if you're thinking of coming to the greater Cleveland area, or Akron area, the OEOC holds an annual conference every year. It is what is recognized as the largest single-day ESOP conference in the country. Last year we attracted over 400 attendees. This year it's being held April 29th and 30th. I said one day. Actually, the conference is on the 30th. We have some festivities on the 29th as well that you might want to attend. And it's being held in Fair Lawn, Ohio, right near Akron. So as we get closer to the April 29th date, please check our website for more details. A note, you will receive an email feedback form after this is finished. Please give us some input so that we can provide future subjects and give us some ideas so we can improve our presentations in the future. At this time, I'm going to stop recording, and if there are no further questions, I want to thank you very much. For those of you who would just like to stick around on the phone after I close for a few questions, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.